What would you do if you overheard two executives planning to hide data that would kill thousands of people and exposing them would destroy your entire family? That's the choice Terrence Walsh faced at 2:47 a.m. on a Tuesday morning in October. He was 52 years old, a janitor, a black man who'd spent 17 years being so invisible that people forgot he existed even when he was standing right in front of them. But that invisibility was about to become the most dangerous thing in his life. Because when you're invisible, people say things around you they shouldn't. They forget you have ears. They forget you have a conscience. They forget you might actually give a damn when you hear them planning to let people die for profit. Terrence Walsh gave a damn, and it cost him absolutely everything. This is his story, the story of an ordinary man who had to choose between staying safe and staying silent, between protecting his family and protecting thousands of strangers he'd never meet. If you're new to TopCore, hit that subscribe button right now, because we tell the stories nobody else will touch, the ones about regular people facing impossible choices, the ones that show you what real courage actually costs. Let me take you back to that Tuesday morning, to a bathroom on the 12th floor, to the conversation that changed everything. Terrence Walsh had been invisible for so long, he'd almost forgotten what it felt like to be seen. 17 years he'd worked at Garrison Pharmaceuticals in Washington, D.C. 17 years of third shift, 11 p.m. to 7 a.m., while the rest of the world slept, while executives in $1,000 suits made decisions that affected millions of lives. Terrence emptied their trash cans and scrubbed their toilets. He was good at his job, efficient, quiet, the kind of employee people looked right through like he was made of glass. That invisibility had benefits. Nobody watched what they said around Terrence. Nobody lowered their voices when he pushed his cleaning cart past their offices. To them, he was furniture. Just another black man in a maintenance uniform who didn't matter enough to notice. Terrence didn't mind. He'd built a good life from that invisibility, a safe life. He had Vanessa, his wife of 28 years, the woman who'd stood by him through everything. 2 kids, Jamal, 24, and in graduate school studying public policy, and Keisha, 21, working as a nurse at Washington General. They'd put both kids through college on a janitor's salary and Vanessa's income from the hospital cafeteria. They weren't rich, but they owned their house, a small 3-bedroom in a decent neighborhood. They had savings. They had stability. They had comfort. That was enough, more than enough. Terrence understood something a lot of people didn't. Being invisible kept you safe. When you didn't stand out, you didn't get knocked down. When you didn't make waves, you didn't drown. He'd learned that lesson early, learned it growing up black in America, learned it working service jobs where speaking up got you fired. Learned it watching other people stick their necks out and get their heads cut off. So Terrence kept his head down, did his job, went home, lived his life, until October 14th. It was 2:47 a.m. when Terrence pushed his cleaning cart toward the executive bathroom on the 12th floor. He'd already cleaned the lower floors, offices, conference rooms, break rooms. The building was empty except for security guards making rounds and the occasional executive who'd fallen asleep at their desk. Terrence had learned to work around them, moving like a ghost through hallways that smelled like expensive cologne and ambition, cleaning their spaces while they dreamed about bonuses and promotions and corner offices.
Terrence saved it for last because it was easy. Quick. Then he could take his 30-minute break in the maintenance room, eat the sandwich Vanessa had packed, and finish the night. He was 10 feet from the bathroom door when he heard voices inside. Terrence stopped. The bathroom should have been empty. It was almost 3 a.m. Who would be in there? He started to back away. He'd come back in 20 minutes when he heard a name that made him freeze. Baridiax. Terrence knew that name. Everyone who worked at Garrison knew it. Baridiax was the company's miracle drug, a treatment for type 2 diabetes that was supposedly going to revolutionize healthcare, change millions of lives. The FDA approval was expected any day now. Garrison's stock had tripled in the past 6 months just on the anticipation. Terrence's hand tightened on his cleaning cart. He should leave, should come back later, should mind his business like he'd been doing for 17 years. But something made him stay. "The FDA panel meets in 9 days, a voice said, male, smooth, the kind of voice used to being listened to. "We need to make sure certain data doesn't surface before then." "The kidney failure incidents?" Another voice, also male, older, worried. Terrence's breath caught in his throat. "Incidents is a strong word, Gerald. We're talking about a small subset of test subjects who experienced elevated creatinine levels. We're talking about 18 people whose kidneys shut down completely. 3 of them died, Richard." Terrence felt his heart start beating faster, louder. So loud he was afraid they'd hear it through the door. "Which is why we're not including that data in the final FDA submission," Richard continued. His voice had an edge now. "The subset was too small to be statistically significant. Including it would only confuse the panel." "Richard, we can't just omit safety data. That's illegal. If a radix gets approved and people start dying, they won't die. The kidney issues only appeared in patients with pre-existing conditions that should have disqualified them from the trial in the first place. Our screening process failed. That's not Viridix's fault." "Listen to yourself. We're talking about hiding data that shows our drug kills people. We're talking about a miracle treatment that will help 50 million Americans manage diabetes. 50 million, Gerald. Are we really going to deny them that because of 18 people who shouldn't have been in the trial to begin with?" Terrence stood frozen, his hands still on the cart, his mind racing. 50 million Americans, 18 people dead, data being hidden, a drug that kills people about to be approved. He heard water running, someone washing their hands. "What about the SEC investigation?" Gerald asked. His voice was quieter now, defeated. "Handled. Senator Morrison is on our side. His daughter has diabetes. He understands what's at stake. The investigation will quietly disappear once Viridix is approved." "And the families of the people who died?" "Signed NDAs, received very generous settlements. They're not going to talk." Terrence heard footsteps approaching the door. He grabbed his card and pushed it quickly around the corner, his heart pounding so hard it hurt. 2 men emerged from the bathroom. Terrence recognized them both. Richard Ashford, Chief Operating Officer. Terrence had cleaned his office 1,000 times. Always immaculate, always smelling like expensive whiskey and power. Gerald Patterson, Head of Clinical Research. Decent guy. Sometimes said thank you when Terrence emptied his trash. One of the few who saw him at all. They walked past without glancing in his direction, talking about quarterly projections like they hadn't just admitted to hiding debts, like they hadn't just conspired to let a dangerous drug get approved, like Terrence didn't exist. Terrence stood in that hallway for a long time after they left. Stood there thinking about Vanessa, about her diabetes, about the insulin she took every morning, about what would happen if her doctor prescribed her Viridix instead, about 50 million Americans who would take a drug that might kill them, about 3 families who'd already lost someone and been paid to stay quiet, about whether a janitor could do anything that mattered, about whether staying invisible was still the safest choice. His hands were shaking when he finally pushed his cart toward the elevator. Not from fear, from something else. Something that felt like anger and responsibility mixed together in a way that made it hard to breathe. Terrence Walsh had been invisible his whole life. Safe, comfortable. But he just heard something that couldn't be ignored. Something that wouldn't let him sleep. Something that made invisibility feel like cowardice. And he had to decide, stay safe or speak up, protect his family or protect strangers, keep his head down or stick his neck out. Terrence didn't tell Vanessa right away. He went home that morning and sat at their small kitchen table while she made breakfast before her early shift. Watched her move around the kitchen they'd painted together 10 years ago. Watched her take her insulin shot, watched her kiss his forehead before heading out the door. "You okay, baby?" she'd asked. "You look like you've seen a ghost." "Just tired," he said. Long night. It was the first lie he told her in 28 years of marriage. It sat in his stomach like a rock. Terrence tried to sleep but couldn't. Just lay in their bed staring at the ceiling, thinking about that conversation, about Richard Ashford's smooth voice justifying 18 deaths, about Gerald Patterson's weak objections, about 50 million Americans, about Vanessa's insulin needle. He got up after 2 hours of not sleeping, made coffee, sat at the table, and thought about doing nothing. It would be easy. Pretend he'd never heard that conversation. Go to work tonight like always. Clean the bathrooms, empty the trash, stay invisible, stay safe.
Who would believe a janitor anyway? If he went to the police, if he tried to report what he'd heard, they'd ask for proof. He had none. Just a story about a conversation overheard in a bathroom at 3 a.m. Richard Ashford would deny everything. Garrison's lawyers would destroy him. He'd lose his job, his benefits, his pension after 17 years. And Vanessa, Jamal, Keisha, they'd lose everything too. The smart thing was to stay quiet. But Terrence kept thinking about that number. 50 million Americans. 50 million people who would take VerityX if it got approved. How many of them would their kidneys shut down? How many would die? How many families would lose someone the way those 18 families already had? He thought about Vanessa's doctor appointment next month. Thought about her doctor mentioning VerityX. Thought about her taking it. Thought about her kidneys failing. Could he live with that? Could he look her in the eye knowing he'd had a chance to stop it and chosen silence? Terrence spent 2 days wrestling with himself. 2 days watching Vanessa take her insulin every morning. 2 days looking at photos of Jamal and Keisha on the mantle. 2 days thinking about the life they'd built through hard work and careful choices. 2 days trying to convince himself that staying quiet was okay. On the third day, he made a decision. He needed help. He couldn't do this alone. But he also couldn't go to the police. He needed someone who would listen, someone who could investigate, someone who could get proof. He needed a journalist. Terrence went to the library on his day off, used the public computer to search for reporters who covered pharmaceutical companies. Found dozens, but one name kept appearing. Angela Morrison, Washington Chronicle, investigative reporter specializing in healthcare fraud and corporate malfeasance. She'd broken stories about drug companies hiding side effects before. She was good, thorough. Terrence called her office from a payphone. Got voicemail. Called again. Voicemail again. On the third try, she answered. "Angela Morrison?" Terrence's mouth dried. "Miss Morrison, my name is Terrence Walsh. I have information about Garrison Pharmaceuticals, about their diabetes drug, VerityX." There was a pause. What kind of information? "The kind that could save a lot of lives if someone listened to me." Another pause. Longer. "Mr. Walsh, I get dozens of calls like this every week. Most of them are from angry employees with access to grind. Why should I believe you're different?" He thought about that. "Because I'm not angry. I don't have an axe to grind. I'm a janitor who overheard something he wasn't supposed to hear, and if I don't tell someone, people are going to die. A lot of people." He could hear her breathing on the other end, thinking, deciding. "Okay," she finally said. "Let's meet. But Mr. Walsh, if you're wasting my time, this conversation ends in 5 minutes. Understood?" "Yes, ma'am." "There's a coffee shop 3 blocks from the Chronicle offices, Bruno's. Tomorrow at 2 p.m. Come alone. And Mr. Walsh, don't tell anyone about this call. Not your wife, not your friends, no one. If Garrison finds out you're talking to me, they'll shut this down before it starts." Angela hung up. Terrence stood at the payphone for a long time, receiver still in his hand, thinking about what he'd just done. He'd crossed the line. No going back now. That night at dinner, Vanessa asked about his day. "Ran some errands. Stopped by the library." Second lie. They were starting to pile up. Vanessa looked at him across the table. Really looked at him. "Terrence, what's going on? You've been different lately. Distant." "Just work stuff, baby. Nothing to worry about." "You sure?" "I'm sure." Third lie. Vanessa reached across the table and took his hand. "Whatever it is, we'll handle it together, okay? We always do." Terrence squeezed her hand. Felt the wedding ring he'd saved 6 months to buy 28 years ago. Thought about telling her everything. About the conversation. About Angela. About the choice he was making. But he didn't. Because if he told her, she'd try to stop him. She'd tell him to stay out of it. She'd remind him about their mortgage, about Jamal's graduate school, about Keisha's student loans, about their careful life. She'd be right to. So Terrence kept quiet, added another lie to the pile. The next day, he told Vanessa he had a doctor's appointment, took the bus to Bruno's coffee shop, arrived 20 minutes early, sat at a corner table, watched the door. Angela Morrison walked in at exactly 2 p.m. She was younger than he'd expected. Early 30s maybe. Sharp eyes that scanned the room and landed on him immediately. She knew. Somehow she knew which one he was. She sat down across from him without ordering anything. "Tell me everything," she said. "And Mr. Walsh, don't leave anything out. Details matter." So Terrence told her about the bathroom, about Richard and Gerald, about 18 people whose kidneys had failed, about 3 who died, about the data being hidden from the FDA, about Senator Morrison and the buried SEC investigation. Angela took notes the entire time. When Terrence finished, she looked at him for a long moment. "Do you have any proof?" she asked. "Just what I heard." Angela shook her head. "That's not enough. Not to go up against Garrison. They have unlimited resources and lawyers who specialize in destroying whistleblowers. If I write the story based only on your word, they'll bury us both. So what do I do?" Angela leaned forward. "You have access to their offices, their trash, their recycling bins, anything they've printed and thrown away. Can you get me that?" Terrence thought about his 17 years of invisible service, about the trust the company had placed in him by forgetting he existed. "Yes," he said, "I can get you that." "Then that's what we need. Documents, emails, memos, anything that proves what you heard. I'll verify it, corroborate it, build a case that can't be denied." "And if they catch me?" Angela's expression hardened. "Then you'll lose everything. Your job, your pension, possibly face criminal charges for theft of proprietary information. And I won't be able to protect you." Terrence sat with that truth, with what he was about to risk. "My wife has diabetes. If VerityX gets approved, her doctor might prescribe it. It could kill her." Angela's expression softened slightly. "Then we stop it from getting approved." They made a plan. Terrence would collect documents nightly. Angela would analyze them. They'd meet weekly at different locations, build the story piece by piece. "One more thing," Angela said as they were leaving. "Assume they're watching. Garrison didn't get to be a multi-billion-dollar company by being careless. If there's even a hint of a leak, they'll be looking for the source." Terrence nodded. They left separately. Terrence first. He walked 3 blocks before catching the bus home. He didn't see the man at the corner table, the one who'd been photographing their entire conversation, the private investigator Garrison had hired after an anonymous tip about a possible leak. The investigator made a phone call.
I found your leak. The night janitor.
For 2 weeks, Terrence lived a double life. By day, he was the same man he'd always been. Husband to Vanessa, father to Jamal and Keisha, the guy who mowed the lawn on Saturdays and went to church on Sundays. The invisible janitor who never caused problems. By night, he became something else. A spy, a thief, a man collecting evidence that could bring down a billion-dollar company. It started small. The first night after meeting Angela, Terrence cleaned Richard Ashford's office like always. But this time, when he emptied the trash, he looked at what was inside. Crumpled papers, printed emails, drafts of documents with handwritten notes in the margins. Most of it was useless. Meeting agendas, lunch receipts, random notes about nothing important. But some of it was gold. An email from Richard to someone named Dr. Chen. Exclude subjects 47 through 65 from final safety analysis. Renal issues confound primary endpoints. Terrence photographed it with his phone, hands shaking so bad the first 3 photos were blurry. He found more over the next few nights. A memo from Gerald Patterson marked confidential, do not distribute. It detailed adverse events in the Veridex trial. 18 cases of acute kidney failure, 3 fatalities, recommendations to include the data in FDA submissions. Someone had written no across the top in red ink. Terrence photographed that too. He found a printout of a text message conversation. Someone had taken a screenshot and printed it, then apparently decided it was too dangerous to keep. Morrison confirmed. One message said, investigation closed, FDA approval, clear path. Each piece of evidence made Terrence's heart beat faster. This was real. This was proof. This was what Angela needed. But collecting it was destroying him. He couldn't focus, couldn't sleep, kept making mistakes at work. His supervisor Marcus called him in after a week. Terrence, what's going on with you? You've been leaving sections uncleaned, missing trash cans. This isn't like you. I'm sorry, Marcus. Personal stuff. I'll do better. Everything okay at home? Fine. Everything's fine. Another lie. At home, Vanessa noticed too. You've been different lately. Distant. What's wrong? Just work stress, baby. They're talking about layoffs. The lies kept piling up. Each one made Terrence feel smaller. Made him wonder if he was doing the right thing. But then he'd watch Vanessa take her insulin. Think about 50 million Americans. Think about 3 families who'd already lost someone and been paid to stay quiet. And he'd go back to work and collect more evidence. Every week, he met Angela at a different location. A park, a library, a McDonald's across town. She'd review what he'd found, ask questions, tell him what else she needed. This is good, she said at their 3rd meeting, but we need more. We need something that directly connects Richard to the FDA submission. Something that proves that they intentionally hid the death data. I'll find it. And Terrence, be careful. If they catch you, I can't protect you. But Terrence didn't know the garrison had already caught him. The private security firm they'd hired had been monitoring the 12th floor for 10 days. Cameras in the hallways captured Terrence spending extra time in executive offices, photographing documents with his phone. They had footage of him meeting Angela at the park, at the library, at McDonald's. They had everything. Richard Ashford reviewed the evidence in his office. Photographs of Terrence, timestamps, surveillance reports detailing his every move. You're certain it's him? Richard asked the security chief. Absolutely. He's been systematically going through executive trash, photographing documents, meeting with Angela Morrison from the Chronicle Weekly. Richard leaned back in his leather chair. Angela Morrison, I should have known. She's been trying to get dirt on pharmaceutical companies for years. What do you want us to do? Nothing yet. Let him collect his evidence. Let him think he's being clever. Then we'll shut it down all at once. Him, the journalist, the whole thing. And if they publish before we can stop them? Richard smiled. They won't. We'll move before they're ready. Get legal on standby. I want everything prepared. NDA, severance package,
criminal charges if he refuses to cooperate, and get me everything on his family: wife, kids, mortgage, debts, everything." "Yes, sir." The security chief left. Richard sat alone in his office looking at Terrence's photo, a 52-year-old black man in a janitor's uniform. Someone Richard had walked past 1,000 times without seeing. "You should have stayed invisible," Richard said to the photo. The trap was set. All they had to do was wait for the right moment to spring it. That moment came 3 days later. Terrence arrived at work and swiped his badge at the entrance like he'd done every night for 17 years. The light turned red. He swiped again, still red. A security guard appeared, not one of the regulars, someone new. "Mr. Walsh, I need you to come with me, please." Terrence's stomach dropped. "Is something wrong?" "Just need to verify some information. This way." Terrence followed the guard through hallways he'd cleaned 1,000 times. But instead of going to HR or the supervisor's office, they went to a conference room on the first floor. Inside sat 3 people Terrence had never seen before. And Richard Ashford. "Mr. Walsh," Richard said, his voice smooth as glass. "Please, have a seat. We have a lot to discuss." The conference room was cold. Or maybe Terrence was just shaking. Richard Ashford sat at the head of the table, perfectly calm. The other 3 people, 2 men and a woman, all in expensive suits, sat like judges at a trial. "Do you know why you're here, Mr. Walsh?" Richard asked. Terrence's mouth was dry. "No, sir." Richard slid a folder across the table. Inside were photographs. Terrence going through trash cans, Terrence photographing documents with his phone, Terrence meeting Angela Morrison at the park, the library, McDonald's. Every meeting, every moment, everything.
"You've been stealing proprietary company information," Richard said, "sharing it with a journalist. Do you understand how serious this is?" Terrence couldn't speak. His whole body felt numb. "I wasn't stealing," he finally managed. "You were what?" Richard's voice cut like a knife. "Protecting the public? How noble. Let me tell you what you actually were, Mr. Walsh. You were a janitor who overheard a private conversation and decided to play hero. You have no idea what you've stumbled into." The woman in the suit spoke up. Her voice was professional, cold. "Mr. Walsh, we're prepared to be reasonable about this. You sign a non-disclosure agreement, return all materials you've taken, and this goes away quietly. You keep your job, your benefits, your pension after 17 years of service. No one needs to know this happened." She slid papers across the table. An NDA, a pen. "And if I don't?" Terrence heard himself ask. Richard leaned forward. "Then we prosecute you for theft of proprietary information, corporate espionage. You'll be lucky to avoid prison time. Your wife, your children, they'll lose everything. Your son's graduate school funding will be investigated for irregularities. Your daughter's nursing license will be reviewed for potential violations. Your home will go into foreclosure when you can't make payments." He paused. "Let that sink in. Your family will be destroyed, Mr. Walsh. Is that what you want?" Terrence thought about Vanessa, about Jamal's dreams of working in public policy, about Keisha saving lives as a nurse, about their house, their careful life. "The drug kills people." "The drug saves millions of people," Richard countered. "Yes, there were complications in a small subset of trial participants. That's why we have trials, to identify risks. We're working with the FDA to ensure proper labeling and usage guidelines. You're hiding deaths, bribing senators. We're navigating a complex regulatory environment to bring a life-saving treatment to market. There's a difference." Richard's voice turned hard. "Mr. Walsh, I'm going to be very clear. If you don't sign this NDA and return everything you've taken, we will destroy you. Not just fire you, destroy you. You'll never work again. Your family will lose everything. Am I making myself clear? Terrence looked at the NDA, at the pen sitting next to it. Thought about 17 years of being invisible, of being safe. Thought about 50 million Americans who would take Veridex, who would trust it was safe because the FDA said so. Thought about Vanessa's insulin. What if her doctor switched her to Veridex? Thought about 3 families who'd already lost someone and been paid to stay quiet. No, Terrence said. Excuse me? I'm not signing. Richard's face went cold. Then you're fired, effective immediately. Security will escort you from the building. Expect to hear from our lawyers. We're suing you for $15 million in damages. 2 security guards appeared at the door. They took Terrence's badge, his keys, his ID card, everything that said he belonged. They walked him out through the main entrance, not the service entrance he'd used for 17 years, the main entrance, where the morning shift was arriving, where people could see. Other employees stared as Terrence was escorted out like a criminal. 17 years, gone in 20 minutes. Terrence sat in his car in the parking lot, hands shaking so bad he couldn't get the key in the ignition. He called Angela. They know. They know everything. Did you sign anything? No. Good. Listen to me carefully, Terrence. We publish tomorrow. The story is ready, but you need to get your family somewhere safe. Do you understand? These people don't play games. Safe? Terrence, you're about to accuse a multi-billion-dollar pharmaceutical company of conspiracy and fraud. They'll come after you with everything they have. Protect your family. Angela hung up. Terrence sat in the parking lot of Garrison Pharmaceuticals for the last time, trying to figure out how to tell his wife that he'd just destroyed their lives. Terrence drove home with his hands gripping the steering wheel so tight his knuckles went white. He kept rehearsing what he'd say to Vanessa, kept trying to find words that would make this okay. There were none. She was in the kitchen when he walked in. It was 10 a.m. He should have been asleep after his night shift. Instead, he was walking through the door looking like his world had just ended. Because it had. Terrence, what are you doing home? What's wrong? He couldn't look at her. We need to talk. You're scaring me. What happened? So, he told her. Everything. The bathroom conversation, Angela Morrison, the evidence collection, getting caught, getting fired, the lawsuit, all of it. Vanessa stood there, listening. Her face went from confused to shocked, to something Terrence had never seen before. Rage. You did what? Her voice cracked like a whip. Terrence, they're going to kill people. They're going to kill us. She was shaking. Terrence, we have a mortgage, car payments, Keisha's student loans. You just threw away 17 years of income and benefits for what? For the truth. For doing the right thing. The right thing? Vanessa's laugh was harsh, broken. The right thing is taking care of your family, not playing hero when nobody asked you to. Did you even think about us? About what this would do to your kids? Of course I thought about you. Then why didn't you tell me? Why did you lie for weeks? Sneak around behind my back? Make this decision for all of us without even asking? Terrence had no answer for that. What if it was you? What if your doctor prescribed you Veridex and it killed you? Would you want someone to speak up then? Vanessa went quiet, tears streaming down her face. I want my husband to choose his family. That's what I want. The article published the next morning. Miracle drug or deadly gamble? Garrison Pharmaceuticals accused of hiding fatal side effects from the FDA. By Angela Morrison. It went viral within hours. Every major news network picked it up. CNN, MSNBC, Fox News. The story was everywhere. Garrison stock dropped 40% by lunch. Trading was halted twice. By afternoon, federal investigators announced a probe. The FDA postponed the approval panel indefinitely. Senator Morrison held a press conference denying wrongdoing. Terrence's phone wouldn't stop ringing. News outlets wanted interviews, lawyers wanted to represent him. His phone number had somehow leaked, and strangers were calling to thank him, threaten him, curse him. He turned it off. 2 days later, Garrison's lawyers filed their lawsuit. $15 million. Civil theft. Breach of confidentiality. Defamation. The works. Vanessa called. I have lawyers who'll take your case pro bono. You're a whistleblower. You're protected. But Terrence didn't feel protected. He felt like he was drowning. Then Jamal called from grad school. Dad, my scholarship just got pulled. They said there were irregularities in the application. Financial aid is investigating. I think Garrison got to them. Terrence closed his eyes. I'm sorry, son. What's happening? Mom called crying. She won't tell me anything. I'll explain everything. Just give me some time. 2 hours later, Keisha called. She was crying. Someone reported me to the nursing board, said I was working under the influence of drugs. Dad, I've never touched drugs in my life. Never. They're suspending my license pending investigation. I could lose my career. Terrence sat on the floor of his empty house. Vanessa had gone to her sister's and realized what Richard meant. They were destroying his family. Systematically. Piece by piece. A week later, Vanessa filed for separation. She came to the house to get her things. Wouldn't look at him. I can't do this, she said. Her voice was empty, dead. I love you, Terrence, but I can't watch you destroy our family for strangers. Vanessa, please. You made your choice. Now I'm making mine. She took half their savings, left them in the house they'd bought together, surrounded by the life they'd built. Alone. Terrence sat at their kitchen table that night, looking at photos of his family. His wife who wouldn't speak to him, his son whose future he destroyed, his daughter whose career was being ruined. The article had sparked federal investigations. Garrison was under scrutiny. Richard Ashford was lawyering up. Senator Morrison was backpedaling. Terrence had done what he set out to do. He'd exposed the truth. And it had cost him everything that mattered. His phone buzzed. A text from an unknown number. You should have signed the NDA. What happens next is on you. Terrence deleted it, but the message was clear. This was just the beginning. 6 months. That's how long the federal investigation took. 6 months of depositions and document reviews and whistleblower testimony. 6 months of Terrence living on unemployment checks that barely covered groceries. 6 months of watching his savings disappear. 6 months of not speaking to his wife. 6 months of his life falling apart while he waited to see if any of it would matter. The house went into foreclosure in month 4. Terrence couldn't make the mortgage payments. The bank sent notices, final warnings, then an eviction date. He moved into a 1-bedroom apartment in a neighborhood where gunshots woke him up at night. The kind of place he'd spent 17 years working to escape. He got a job at a grocery store. Part-time, $12 an hour, stocking shelves, wearing a vest with a name tag, being invisible again. But this time, invisibility didn't feel safe. It felt like failure. Jamal had to leave grad school. Couldn't afford tuition without the scholarship. He moved back to Detroit, working at a call center. His dreams of public policy work were gone. Keisha fought the nursing board complaint for 3 months before it was dismissed. The investigation found no evidence, but the damage was done. Hospitals didn't want to hire someone with a cloud over their record. Both kids knew what their father had done. Neither one called. But while Terrence's life crumbled, the federal investigation was finding everything. Angela's article had opened floodgates. Other Garrison employees came forward with their own stories. People who'd been threatened, silenced, paid off. A chemist who'd been told to manipulate test results. a trial coordinator who'd been ordered to exclude sick patients from safety data, a lab technician who'd been fired for questioning protocols. The evidence piled up. Emails, memos, recorded conversations, everything Terrence had found and more. The FDA discovered that Garrison had systematically hidden adverse events from 18 patients. 3 deaths, 15 cases of acute kidney failure, all excluded from the final submission. They found emails proving Richard Ashford had personally ordered the data omissions, proving Gerald Patterson had objected and been overruled, proving Senator Morrison had taken campaign contributions in exchange for bearing the SEC investigation. The verdict came down in March. Veridex's approval was permanently denied. The drug would never reach the market. Richard Ashford was arrested, walked out of Garrison headquarters in handcuffs while news cameras rolled. He was charged with fraud, conspiracy, and reckless endangerment. 3 other executives were arrested too. The VP of Clinical Operations, 2 senior researchers, all facing federal charges.
Senator Morrison resigned, announced he wouldn't seek re-election, claimed he'd been misled. Garrison Pharmaceuticals paid a $2.3 billion fine, the largest pharmaceutical penalty in 5 years. They agreed to independent safety monitoring for all future drug trials. Their reputation was destroyed. The Department of Justice held a press conference, announced that Terrence Walsh's disclosure had prevented an estimated 5,000 to 15,000 deaths, maybe more. All the people who would have taken Veridex, whose kidneys would have failed, who would have died because a company valued profits over lives. Terrence watched the press conference from his apartment, on a TV he'd bought at a thrift store. They called him a hero, a patriot, someone who'd sacrificed everything for truth. He was invited to speak at conferences, offered book deals. Movie producers called wanting his story. But Terrence sat in his 1-bedroom apartment, working part-time at a grocery store for $12 an hour, and felt nothing. He'd saved thousands of lives and lost the only 3 that truly mattered to him. His phone rang. Unknown number. He almost didn't answer. Mr. Walsh? Yes? My name is Catherine Bennett. My father was one of the 18 patients in the Veridex trial. He died from kidney failure. Terrence's heart sank. I'm very sorry for your loss. Don't be sorry. I'm calling to thank you. My father signed their NDA, Catherine Bennett said. Her voice was steady, but Terrence could hear the pain underneath. Took Garrison's settlement money, $100,000 to stay quiet about how they killed him. Terrence sat on the edge of his thrift store couch, phone pressed to his ear, not knowing what to say. He died believing he was helping create a miracle drug, believing his death meant something. He never knew they'd killed him with their greed, that they'd hidden the data, that they'd paid us off to protect their profits. I'm so sorry, Terrence managed. Don't be. I'm not calling for sympathy. I'm calling to thank you. Terrence blinked. Thank me? My daughter is 11 years old. She has type 2 diabetes, diagnosed 6 months ago. Her doctor was so excited about Veridex, kept telling us to wait, that this new miracle drug was coming, that it would change her life. Catherine's voice broke. If Veridex had been approved, he would have prescribed it. My daughter would have taken it, and I would have lost her the same way I lost my father. Terrence felt something crack open in his chest. You saved her life, Mr. Walsh. You saved my daughter. You saved thousands of daughters and sons and mothers and fathers. You saved people who'll never know your name, who'll never know how close they came to dying. She paused. I know what it cost you. I read the articles about your job, your family, everything you lost. And I wanted you to know that it mattered, that it meant something, that somewhere in Ohio, there's a little girl who gets to grow up because you refuse to stay quiet.
After Catherine hung up, Terrence sat in his apartment for a long time, looking at the cracked ceiling, the peeling paint, the life he'd fallen into. For the first time in 6 months, he cried. Not from grief, from something else. Something that felt like validation. Like maybe, just maybe, the sacrifice had been worth it. The calls started coming after that. Other families, people who'd lost loved ones in the trial, people whose doctors had been planning to prescribe Veridex, people who were alive because Terrence had spoken up. Not all the calls were kind. Some people blamed him for killing a miracle drug, for denying diabetics a treatment that could have helped them, for being a disgruntled employee who destroyed a company. But enough calls were like Catherine's. Enough people thanked him. Enough lives had been saved. It didn't pay his rent, didn't bring back his family, didn't undo what he'd lost. But it meant something. 3 months after the verdict, Terrence got a call from a congressional staffer. A senator from Massachusetts wanted to meet with him. She was proposing new whistleblower protection legislation. Terrence took the bus to Washington, walked into Senator Warren's office wearing the same thrift store suit he'd worn to the grocery store job interview. "Mr. Walsh," Senator said, shaking his hand, "thank you for coming. What happened to you, what Garrison did to your family, it's unconscionable. We need laws that protect people like you instead of punishing them." They talked for an hour about what Terrence had gone through, the retaliation, the lawsuit, the attacks on his children, the destruction of his life.
"I'm introducing the Pharmaceutical Whistleblower Protection Act," Senator Warren said. "It will provide legal immunity for employees who report safety violations, financial support during investigations, protection from retaliation, criminal penalties for companies that go after whistleblowers' families." She looked at him directly. "It won't help you. The law isn't retroactive, but it will help the next person, the next Terrence Wash who has to make an impossible choice. Because of you, they won't face what you faced. They won't lose everything for doing the right thing." "Will it pass?" Terrence asked. "I don't know, but I'm going to fight for it. And I'd like you to testify before Congress. Tell your story. Help us make the case." Terrence thought about that, about standing in front of cameras again, reliving the worst moments of his life, exposing his pain for political purposes. "If it helps the next person, I'll do it." The Pharmaceutical Whistleblower Protection Act passed 14 months later. Not perfect, watered down by industry lobbying, but real. A law that would protect future whistleblowers. Terrence watched the signing ceremony on his thrift store TV. Watched the president sign a bill that existed because he'd refused to stay silent. It still didn't pay his bills, still didn't bring his family back, but it was something. A legacy beyond his own suffering. 2 years after the verdict, Terrence was stocking shelves at the grocery store when someone tapped his shoulder. He turned around. It was Gerald Patterson, the head of clinical research from Garrison, the man whose voice Terrence had heard in that bathroom arguing with Richard. Gerald looked older, tired. He testified against Richard during the trial, cut a deal with prosecutors, avoided jail time, but lost everything else. "Mr. Wash, I just wanted to say, I'm sorry. I knew what Richard was doing was wrong. I objected, but I didn't fight hard enough. I didn't go to the FDA. I didn't quit. I chose my career over people's lives." Terrence didn't know what to say. "You did what I should have done. You had more courage in that bathroom than I had in 20 years at Garrison. And I wanted you to know that I see that now, that I understand what you sacrificed, that it mattered." Gerald walked away before Terrence could respond. Terrence went back to stocking shelves, but something felt different, lighter. Maybe it was knowing that even the people who had been part of the conspiracy recognized what he'd done. Maybe it was the accumulation of small validations. Catherine's call, the congressional testimony, the law, Gerald's apology. Maybe it was finally accepting that he'd made the right choice, even if it was the hardest choice. 3 years after the article published, on a Tuesday morning in October, Terrence's phone rang. Unknown number. He almost didn't answer, but something made him pick up. Terrence? He knew that voice, had known it for 31 years, had fallen asleep to it and woken up to it and built a life around it. Vanessa? Yeah, it's me. A pause. Can we talk? Terrence sat down on his couch. His hands were shaking. Of course. I've been thinking, Vanessa said. Her voice was careful, uncertain. About what you did, about why you did it. I was angry for a long time. So angry. I blamed you for everything we lost. You had every right to. Maybe, but I also have diabetes. And last week, my doctor told me about a new treatment that was in development. Would have been approved by now, called Varidex. His breath caught. He said it was killed by an FDA scandal, that some whistleblower exposed the company was hiding deaths. And I realized, Terrence? That could have been me. If you hadn't spoken up, my doctor would have prescribed that drug. My kidneys could have failed. I could have died. She was crying now. You might have saved my life, along with all those other people, and I spent 3 years hating you for it. Vanessa, I don't blame you for being angry. I destroyed our family.
You chose between saving strangers and protecting us. That's not the same thing. I'm starting to understand that now. I don't know if I can forgive you yet. I don't know if we can ever be what we were. But I wanted you to know that I see it differently now, that I'm trying to understand. That's more than I deserve, Terrence said. Maybe we could get coffee sometime. Just talk. No promises. Just try to rebuild something. Terrence closed his eyes. I'd like that. After they hung up, Terrence sat in his apartment and let himself feel something he hadn't felt in 3 years. Hope. Not hope that everything would go back to normal. That ship had sailed. But hope that maybe, just maybe, the people he loved could see why he'd made the choice he made. That maybe losing everything didn't mean losing everyone forever. The road back would be long, if there even was a road back. But for the first time since that night in the bathroom, Terrence felt like he could breathe. 5 years after the article published, Terrence Walsh stood in front of a college auditorium full of students. He still worked at the grocery store, still lived in the one-bedroom apartment, still drove a car that was one breakdown away from the junkyard. But twice a year, he accepted speaking invitations at universities, talked to students about whistleblowing, about courage, about the cost of doing right. Today, it was Georgetown University, pre-law students who wanted to change the world but hadn't yet learned how expensive change could be. I'm not going to tell you that everything worked out. That's not how this story ends. I lost my career, my pension, my home. My marriage fell apart. My kids' lives were damaged. I went from middle-class stability to working poverty in a matter of weeks. He paused, looked at their young faces. But I sleep at night. I look in the mirror and I don't hate what I see. Because somewhere out there, thousands of people are alive who wouldn't be if I'd stayed quiet. Mothers, fathers, children, people with diabetes who would have trusted that Varidex was safe because the FDA approved it. A student raised her hand. Do you regret it? If you could go back, would you make the same choice? He thought about that, about Vanessa's voice on the phone, about Jamal, who'd eventually gone back to school, different program, different state, but back, about Keisha, whose nursing career had recovered after the false complaint was exposed, about Catherine Bennett's daughter in Ohio, alive, healthy, growing up. Yes, he said, I'd make the same choice. Not because I'm a hero, because once you know something like that, you can't unknow it. Once you understand that your silence will kill people, staying silent becomes impossible. At least it was for me. Another student. But your family suffered. Was that fair to them? No, it wasn't fair. My wife didn't choose this. My kids didn't choose this. They paid a price for my decision. That's the part that still keeps me up at night. Not what I lost, what they lost. He gripped the podium. But I also think about my wife's diabetes, about the very real possibility that her doctor would have prescribed her Veredix if it had been approved, about whether I could have lived with watching her kidneys fail, knowing I could have stopped it. There's no good answer, no choice that doesn't cost something. You just have to decide what you can live with. I couldn't live with silence. After the talk, students lined up to ask questions, thank him, take selfies. They saw him as inspiring, a hero. Terrence saw himself as a 57-year-old man who'd made an impossible choice and was still paying for it. But he also saw the law that bore his name, informally at least, the Pharmaceutical Whistleblower Protection Act that people called the Walsh Act. He saw the 3 other whistleblowers who'd come forward in the past 5 years exposing other drug company frauds who had legal protection because of what happened to him. He saw change, small, incremental, but real. Terrence drove back to his apartment, stopped at the grocery store, his grocery store, to pick up dinner, nodded at his coworkers, bought a frozen meal because cooking for one still felt depressing. At home, he ate dinner and called Vanessa. They talked twice a week now, sometimes about nothing, sometimes about rebuilding, slowly, carefully. They'd had coffee 17 times in the past 2 years, dinner 3 times. Once, they'd even laughed about something, actually laughed like old times. They weren't back together, might never be. Too much damage, too much time. But they were something. Friends, maybe. Or 2 people who'd loved each other once and were trying to figure out if any of that love survived. How was the talk? Vanessa asked. Good. Those kids still think they can change the world. You did change the world, Terrence, just not the way you planned. After they hung up, Terrence sat in his apartment and thought about invisibility. About how he'd spent 17 years being invisible because it kept him safe. How that invisibility had let him overhear something that changed everything. About how being seen, really seen, for standing up when it mattered had cost him everything, but given him something too. Purpose, meaning. The knowledge that his life had mattered beyond his own comfort. His phone buzzed. Text from Jamal. Hey Dad, graduation is next month. Master's in Public Health. I know things have been complicated, but I want you there. You're the reason I'm doing this work. Seeing you stand up changed what I thought was possible. Love you. Terrence read the message 3 times, felt tears running down his face. His son, whose scholarship he'd destroyed, whose life he derailed, was graduating, was doing meaningful work, and credited Terrence for inspiring him. Another text came through, Keisha this time. Dad, I got the job. Pediatric oncology nurse. I start next month. I'll be taking care of kids with cancer. Kids whose families are terrified and broke and desperate. Kids who need someone who understands what it's like when the system fails you. Thank you for showing me that standing up matters more than staying comfortable. Terrence sat on his thrift store couch in his 1-bedroom apartment and cried. Not from grief, from something bigger. His kids understood, finally understood why he'd made the choice he made. They'd been angry, hurt, felt abandoned, but somewhere along the way they'd seen it. The sacrifice, the principle, the impossible choice between comfort and conscience. And they'd chosen their own paths of service because of it. Maybe that was the real legacy. Not the law, not the lives saved, but teaching his children that some things matter more than safety. That speaking truth to power costs everything, and you do it anyway. Terrence thought about that 19-year-old girl in Ohio, Catherine Bennett's daughter, alive, because he'd refused to stay silent. She'd be in high school now, maybe thinking about college, living a normal life, never knowing how close she came to dying. He thought about the thousands like her, people who would never know his name, who lived because he'd been in the right place at the wrong time and made the hard choice. Being invisible had kept him safe for 17 years, but being seen, being really seen for standing up when it mattered, that was worth the cost, even when the cost was everything. Terrence Walsh never got rich, never got famous beyond his brief moment in the news cycle, never got his old life back, but he got something else, something that couldn't be taken away by lawsuits or lost jobs or broken marriages. He got to be the person his children were proud of, the person who'd looked at an impossible choice and chosen conscience over comfort, the person who'd saved thousands of lives even though it destroyed his own. He got meaning, purpose, the ability to sleep at night knowing he'd done the right thing. And in the end, that had to be enough, because being invisible was safe, being comfortable was easy, being silent was simple. But being seen, being really seen for standing up when truth needed a voice, that was worth everything, even when everything was all you had to give. Terrence looked at the texts from his children, read them again, saved them. Then he opened his laptop and started writing a response to the next speaking invitation. From a high school in Detroit, they wanted him to talk to students about courage. He'd tell them the truth, that courage costs, that doing right doesn't guarantee happy endings, that you can lose everything and still have to wake up the next morning and figure out how to keep going. But he'd also tell them about Catherine's daughter in Ohio, about the law that protects whistleblowers now, about his own children choosing service over safety. He'd tell them that your life's value isn't measured in comfort or wealth or staying invisible.
It's measured in whether you stood up when it mattered, whether you chose truth over silence, whether you opened your mouth when keeping it shut was safer. Terrence Walsh had been invisible for 52 years. Then he'd been seen, really seen, for one moment of courage that defined everything after. And that moment, that choice to speak when silence was safer, had saved thousands of lives, including, possibly, the life of the woman he'd loved for 31 years. That was his legacy. That was his truth. And it was enough. 7 years after that night in the bathroom, Terrence Walsh stood on the porch of a house he'd never thought he'd see again. The house on Oakwood Avenue. The one he and Vanessa had bought 22 years ago. The one that had gone into foreclosure. The one he'd lost along with everything else. Except it wasn't lost anymore. 6 months ago, Jamal and Keisha had pooled their money, tracked down the property, found out it was for sale again, bought it. Not for themselves, for him. Dad deserves to come home, Keisha had said when they presented him with the keys. Not to the old life, that's gone, but to a place that remembers who we were, who we still are. Now Terrence stood on that porch looking at the door he'd walked through 1,000 times. Vanessa stood beside him. Not as his wife, they'd never remarried, but as something else. Something harder to define but no less real. Partners. Friends. Two people who'd loved each other, lost each other, and found a different kind of love on the other side of destruction. "You ready?" she asked. "Yeah, I'm ready." Inside, the house was full of people. Jamal and his fiancée, Keisha and her girlfriend, friends from the grocery store, Angela Morrison, the journalist who'd believed him when no one else would, even a few former co-workers from Garrison who testified during the investigation. And sitting in the corner, quiet and uncertain, was Gerald Patterson, the man whose voice Terrence had heard in that bathroom 7 years ago, the man who'd known the truth and hadn't been brave enough to speak it. "Thank you for inviting me," Gerald said when Terrence approached. "I wasn't sure I should come." You testified against Richard. You told the truth when it mattered. 3 years too late, after you'd already lost everything. Terrence sat down beside him. Better late than never. You helped put him in prison. That counts. He nodded, eyes wet. I think about that night all the time, in the bathroom. I knew what Richard was doing was evil. I said so. But I didn't quit. I didn't go to the authorities. I chose my paycheck over people's lives. And then I watched you, a janitor who had everything to lose, do what I should have done. He looked at Terrence. Do you know what that's like? Knowing someone with less power and more courage did your job for you? You lived with guilt. I lived with consequences. Neither one was easy. But you can look in the mirror. So can you now. You testified. You made it right. They sat in silence for a moment. Two men on opposite ends of an impossible choice. Both scarred, both trying to find meaning in the wreckage. The doorbell rang. Vanessa answered it. A woman in her 40s stood there, with a teenage girl. The girl was holding a cake. I'm sorry to intrude, she said. I'm Catherine Bennett. We spoke on the phone years ago. This is my daughter, Emma.
Terrence stood up. He remembered the father who died in the trial, the daughter with diabetes who would have taken Veredix. Emma wanted to meet you, Catherine continued. She's applying to colleges next year. Pre-med. She wants to be an endocrinologist, help other kids with diabetes. And she wanted to thank the man who gave her a future. Emma stepped forward. She was tall, healthy, vibrant. Everything her grandfather hadn't gotten to be. Mr. Walsh, my mom told me what you did, what it cost you. I just wanted you to know that I'm alive because of you. I get to go to college, fall in love, have a career, have a life because you refused to stay quiet. She handed him the cake. On top, written in frosting, heroes don't always wear capes. Sometimes they push cleaning carts. Terrence felt his throat close up. He couldn't speak. Emma hugged him. The stranger, this girl whose life he'd saved without ever knowing her name. Thank you, she whispered. Thank you for being brave when being brave cost everything. The party continued around them. People talking, laughing, remembering, telling stories about the investigation, the trial, the aftermath. But Terrence found himself outside on the porch again, looking at the street he'd walked down every day for 15 years, the life he'd built and lost, and somehow found again in a different form. Jamal joined him. You okay there? Yeah, just thinking. About what? About that night, in the bathroom. About how different my life would be if I'd just walked away. If I'd minded my business. Stayed invisible. Jamal leaned against the railing. Would you change it if you could go back? Terrence thought about that. Really thought about it. He thought about the foreclosure, the divorce, the poverty, the years of struggling, the pain he'd caused his family. But he also thought about Emma Bennett inside, alive and planning for college, about the Pharmaceutical Whistleblower Protection Act that protected people now, about his son getting a master's in public health and his daughter saving children's lives as a nurse, about Catherine's phone call, "You saved my daughter," and about sleeping at night without guilt eating him alive. No, Terrence said. I wouldn't change it. It nearly killed me, but I'd do it again. Jamal nodded. Good. Because watching you make that choice, watching you lose everything and keep going anyway, that changed me, Dad. Changed how I see the world, what I think is possible, what I think matters. He put his hand on Terrence's shoulder. I spent 2 years being angry at you, blaming you for ruining our lives. But then I started really thinking about what you did. You chose saving strangers over protecting your family. That's not selfish. That's the hardest kind of love there is. Keisha came outside too. Dad, Angela's asking for you. She wants to get a photo. In a minute. Keisha leaned against the other side of the porch.
I heard what Jamal said. He's right. What you did changed how I see nursing. I used to think my job was just to follow doctor's orders, give meds, follow protocols. But you taught me that sometimes the right thing is breaking the rules, speaking up when you see something wrong, even when it costs you. She smiled. Last month, I reported an attending physician for ordering dangerous dosages. He was furious, tried to get me fired. But I had your example. I knew that doing right matters more than keeping your job.
Did you lose your job? Terrence asked. No, the hospital investigated, found out he'd been making mistakes for months. They fired him instead. Saved who knows how many patients. And I learned that standing up doesn't always end in disaster. Sometimes it ends in justice. Terrence looked at his children, his incredible children who'd suffered for his choice, but somehow become better people because of it. I'm sorry, he said, for what I put you through, for the scholarships lost and the investigations and the pain. You deserved better. We got better, Jamal said. We got a father who showed us what integrity looks like, what courage costs. That's worth more than any scholarship. Vanessa came outside. There's someone else here to see you. A man in his 30s stood in the doorway, black, well-dressed, nervous. Mr. Walsh? My name is Marcus Rivers. I am a federal prosecutor. I handle pharmaceutical fraud cases. And I wanted to meet you because you're the reason my job exists. He stepped onto the porch. After the Veritex case, Congress created a whole new division of the DOJ focused on drug company fraud. I was hired 3 years ago. Since then, we've investigated 12 companies, found safety violations in 8, stopped 4 dangerous drugs from reaching the market. Marcus pulled out his phone, showed Terrence photos. This is my daughter, Zara. She's 6, has a rare genetic disorder, takes 5 different medications daily. Every single one of those medications went through the new safety protocols that exist because of what you exposed. He looked Terrence in the eye. My daughter is alive because pharmaceutical companies know they can't hide data anymore, because whistleblowers are protected, because one janitor refused to stay quiet. I wanted you to know that your sacrifice is still saving lives every single day. After Marcus left, Terrence stood alone on the porch for a moment. 7 years. 7 years since that night in the bathroom. 7 years of consequences and costs and slow rebuilding. But also 7 years of lives saved. Laws changed. Systems improved. Children growing up who wouldn't have survived under the old way of doing business. Emma Bennett planning for college. Marcus Revers' daughter alive and healthy. Thousands more whose names Terrence would never know. The door opened. Everyone was gathered inside, waiting. Come on, Dad, Keisha called. Angela wants to make a toast. Terrence walked back inside, to the house he'd lost and found again, to his family that had broken and healed in a different shape, to the life that had been destroyed and rebuilt into something he never could have imagined. Angela raised her glass. To Terrence Walsh, the man who chose truth over comfort, who paid the ultimate price and never complained, who showed us all what real courage looks like. Everyone raised their glasses. To Terrence. But Terrence shook his head. No, not just to me, but to everyone in this room who stood up when standing up was hard. Gerald, who finally testified, Angela, who believed a janitor's story, Jamal and Keisha, who forgave me, Vanessa, who understood even when she didn't want to everyone who chooses truth over silence. He looked around the room, at the faces of people who'd suffered and survived, who'd fought and persevered, who'd lost and rebuilt. 7 years ago, I was invisible. I thought that was my power. But I learned something. Being invisible kept me safe, but it also kept me silent. And silence, when people are dying, is just another form of violence. He raised his glass. So here's to being seen, to speaking up, to making the hard choices, to losing everything and discovering that some things are worth losing everything for. They drank. They ate. They celebrated not a victory,
There had been too much loss for that. But a survival, a perseverance, a refusal to let the cost erase the meaning. Later that night, after everyone had gone home, Terrence stood in the empty living room of his house. His house again. Not the same as before. Nothing was the same as before. But maybe that was okay. Maybe the old life needed to die so a new one could be born. A life built not on invisibility and safety, but on truth and courage, and the knowledge that he'd stood up when it mattered. His phone buzzed. A message from Angela. 3 more whistleblowers contacted me this month. Pharmaceutical, medical device, and biotech. All of them cited your case as their inspiration. The work continues. Thank you for starting.
Terrence smiled, put his phone away, looked at the house that remembered who he'd been and who he'd become. 7 years ago, he'd overheard a conversation in a bathroom, made a choice that destroyed his life, and somehow, impossibly, that destruction had created something bigger, something that mattered. Laws that protected truth-tellers, systems that valued safety over profit, children who got to grow up, families that stayed whole, and a man who could finally look in the mirror without flinching. Terrence Walsh had been invisible for 52 years. Then he'd been seen, really seen, and it had cost him everything. But standing in his living room, thinking about Emma Bennett and Marcus Rivers and all the others, he knew the truth. Some prices are worth paying. Some sacrifices are worth making. Some voices are worth raising, even when raising them costs everything. Being invisible was safe. Being comfortable was easy. Being silent was simple. But being seen, being really seen for standing up when truth needed a voice, that changed the world. And changing the world was worth it, even when it cost everything you had. Especially then. Terrence Walsh lost his career, his marriage, his home, and years of his life. But he saved thousands of people who'll never know his name. That's what real courage looks like. Not Hollywood heroism, not glory or fame. Just an ordinary person making an impossible choice and living with the consequences. If this story moved you, do something for me right now. Hit that like button, because that tells me you want more stories about real people facing real choices, the uncomfortable stories, the ones that show what sacrifice actually costs. Drop a comment below and tell me, would you have stayed silent or spoken up? Have you ever had to choose between doing right and staying safe? What would you sacrifice to save strangers you'll never meet? I read every comment. Your voice matters here. And if you're new to TopCore, subscribe right now, because we tell the stories mainstream media won't touch. Stories about people who refused to stay silent, who stood up when standing up cost everything, who changed the world by refusing to ignore the truth. Share this story with someone who needs to hear it, someone who's facing their own impossible choice, someone who needs to know that doing right doesn't guarantee a happy ending, but it guarantees meaning. Next video, a story that'll shake you. A black woman discovers her adoption papers and learns her real mother is the white billionaire who's been her employer for 20 years. What happens when she confronts her will leave you speechless. This is TopCore, where truth costs everything, where courage isn't easy, where ordinary people do extraordinary things. Terrence Walsh was invisible until he chose to be seen. What will you choose when your moment comes? Subscribe, share, speak up. See you in the next video.